At 17 minutes past 9 on the morning of the 7th of February, 1944, Sergeant Alastair MacLeod, late of the Scottish Highlands and a man with precisely 0 confirmed kills to his name, crouched low within the shattered remains of a Japanese bunker west of the Maungdaw-Buthidaung Road, in the heart of the Arakan. In his hands, he cradled something no other squaddy in the entire 14th Army carried, a pre-war Holland and Holland bolt-action rifle in .303 British, fitted with a German Zeiss Zielvier 4X scope. It was a sporting rifle, a gentleman's weapon, a thing of polished walnut and finely machined steel. It was something his superiors had dismissed as a foolish affectation when he had first unpacked it. But Sergeant MacLeod had not come to the festering green hell of Burma to impress officers. He had come for a very specific reason. Over the preceding 72 hours, Japanese snipers, phantoms in the jungle canopy, had killed 14 men from the 2nd Battalion, the Black Watch. 14 lads, picked off one by one, their lives extinguished by shots that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The hunters had been having a field day. Now, Alastair MacLeod was here to hunt the hunters. If you want to witness how MacLeod's civilian rifle fared against Japanese snipers, masters of jungle warfare, then please, take a moment to press that like button. It truly helps us to share more forgotten histories like this one. And do subscribe if you haven't already. But first, you need to understand why a sergeant in the British Army was carrying a bespoke hunting rifle into battle. MacLeod was no ordinary soldier. Before the war, he was a ghillie, a professional deerstalker on a vast estate in Sutherland. His world was the wind-scoured granite and purple heather of the Highlands, a place of patience, silence, and the single, perfect shot. He had competed in and won the King's Prize at Bisley in 1938, the most prestigious shooting competition in the Empire. When Britain declared war, he understood something the Army, in its focus on mass-produced material, was slow to grasp. The standard-issue sniper rifles, the Lee Enfield No. 4.T.S., were good, very good, in fact, but there were never enough of them. Moreover, the No. 32 scopes they were issued with were delicate instruments that fogged and lost their zero in the crushing humidity of the jungle. MacLeod knew a better tool for the job. The Holland and Holland that had been his constant companion for a decade stalking red deer. He knew its every idiosyncrasy. He knew exactly how the bullet would drop at 200, 300, 400 yards. He knew how the cross-Scots wind on a glen would nudge its trajectory, and he could translate that instinct to the baffling, windless heat of the Burmese jungle. He knew how the barrel warming after 2 or 3 shots would ever so slightly alter the point of impact. So, he did something utterly unorthodox. Through a contact at home, he had arranged for his own rifle to be shipped out to him. It arrived on a supply ship into Chittagong in January 1944. When he uncased it in the Boscher he shared with his section, the reaction was exactly as he'd anticipated. Laughter. Going after stag in the jungle, Mac, one of the lads had quipped. The Japs aren't bloody dear, mate, another had added. That toy won't last a day in this climate. MacLeod had said nothing. He simply stripped and cleaned the rifle with a familiar, loving precision, oiled the action, checked the zero on his precious German scope, and waited for his chance. That chance came on the 7th of February. His battalion commander, a weary but astute lieutenant colonel, had summoned him. The sniper problem was becoming critical, crippling morale and halting patrols. The colonel gave him a specific mission: locate and eliminate the snipers who were bleeding his battalion dry. MacLeod agreed, but on one condition. He would go alone. No escort. No support section. The Japanese snipers, known as Seitei, worked in pairs or alone. If MacLeod took a section with him, the noise of their movement, the clink of a canteen against a rifle butt, would give them away. The phantoms would simply melt back into the jungle. He stood a chance only if he moved as he always had, in absolute silence, like a hunter. At 8:30 that morning, MacLeod slipped out from the British perimeter. He carried his Holland and Holland, 40 rounds of Mark 7 ammunition, his Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, 2 full water bottles, and nothing more. The Arakan jungle was a living, breathing monster. 95% humidity that clung to you like a shroud, temperatures soaring past 35 degrees Celsius, and clouds of mosquitoes so thick you could choke on them. And somewhere in that suffocating green labyrinth were men trained for years to kill British soldiers without ever being seen. MacLeod moved slowly, with a patience that was almost inhuman. Each footfall was a calculated decision, placing his boot where it would make no sound. At 9:05, he heard the first shot. The sharp, dry crack of a Type 99 rifle, perhaps 300 yards to the northwest. Another one of his mates had just died. MacLeod didn't flinch. He simply altered his course, moving towards the sound like a shark turning towards a drop of blood in the water. At 9:12, he found what he was looking for. The broad, waxy leaves of a banana tree were trembling in a way that was entirely unnatural. There was no breeze. The movement was human. MacLeod eased himself to the ground, the damp earth instantly soaking through his jungle-green fatigues. He brought the Holland and Holland to his shoulder, the cold metal of the scope a familiar caress against his eyebrow. He set the range to roughly 250 yards, rested his cheek against the smooth walnut stock he knew so well, and waited. At 9:15, the Japanese sniper made his first, and last, mistake. He shifted his position, trying to get a better field of fire. For 2 seconds, a fleeting silhouette of head and shoulder was visible against the trunk of the tree. MacLeod's training took over. He breathed out, his world narrowing to the fine lines of the reticle. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, a familiar, comforting punch. Through the scope, he saw the Japanese soldier pitch backwards and fall a good 30 feet from his perch in the canopy. First sniper eliminated. MacLeod did not move. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even allow himself a deeper breath. With a single, fluid motion born of 1,000 repetitions, his hand worked the bolt on his rifle, ejecting the spent brass cartridge and chambering a fresh round. He continued to scan through the scope, because he knew something that many newly arrived British soldiers learned at the cost of their lives: Japanese snipers rarely worked alone. At 9:21, his patience paid off. 200 yards from his position, another sniper, the first man's observer, began to scan the jungle, trying to pinpoint where the shot had come from. He made the fatal error of moving his head too quickly. MacLeod's rifle cracked again. Second sniper eliminated. 2 shots. 2 kills. He immediately began to withdraw from his position. Never fire more than twice from the same spot. It was the cardinal rule of his craft. The Japanese would now be certain there was a British countersniper in the area. If he stayed put, he would become the hunted. He moved 400 yards to the east, using the folds in the terrain to mask his movement, and found a natural depression in the ground. He settled in and began his patient observation once more. At 10:03, he identified movement in the crown of a vast kapok tree, about 320 yards out. This one was trickier. The sniper was expertly camouflaged, using a harness to tie himself to the branches. Only a small patch of his khaki uniform was visible. MacLeod adjusted the scope, compensating for the range, breathed twice, held his breath on the exhale, and fired. The body slumped in the harness before tumbling through the branches to hit the jungle floor with a distant, sickening thud. Third sniper eliminated. 46 minutes into his operation. At 10:47, MacLeod located another sniper nest. This time, there were 2 of them working together, positioned in the same colossal banyan tree but on different branches. It was a poor tactical choice. It allowed them to cover each other, but it also meant that if one was hit, the other would instinctively reveal his position by looking to see what had happened. MacLeod decided to exploit that weakness. He drew a bead on the first man. Fired. The Japanese soldier dropped from his branch. Just as he'd predicted, the second sniper spun around to look. MacLeod worked the bolt. The empty casing flew out, glinting in the dappled sunlight. A new round slid home. He fired at the second man before he could even register the danger. Fourth and fifth snipers eliminated. 2 rounds in less than 4 seconds. If you are still with us, you are a part of this history. Subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion to Alistair MacLeod's hunt. By midday, MacLeod had eliminated 7 Japanese snipers. He had fired 9 rounds, missing only twice, both times because the target had moved at the precise instant he fired. But the jungle was beginning to take its toll. The heat was a physical blow, the air thick and hard to breathe. He had drunk nearly all the water from his canteens, and he knew the Japanese would have realized by now that someone was systematically dismantling their sniper screen. They would change their tactics. He decided to return to the British perimeter. He reported his results to the lieutenant colonel. The gaffer couldn't believe it. 7 confirmed. With that hunting rifle? MacLeod just nodded. How much ammunition did you use, Sergeant? 9 rounds, sir. The colonel stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then he did something MacLeod hadn't expected. Sergeant, I want you to start training my best marksmen. Teach them what you know. MacLeod agreed, but first, he had a job to finish. The remaining snipers were still out there, still killing his comrades. On the 8th of February, MacLeod went back into the jungle. This time, the Japanese knew something had changed. Their remaining snipers were far more cautious, moving more frequently, changing positions every few minutes. They didn't linger in the trees. But that also made them more vulnerable. Every movement was a risk, an opportunity to be detected. At 8:45, MacLeod spotted a sniper climbing down from a tree to relocate. It was his most vulnerable moment. MacLeod fired as the Japanese soldier was hanging from a branch, halfway to the ground. 8th sniper eliminated. At 10:22, another sniper made the mistake of firing at a British patrol only 150 yards from MacLeod's position. The muzzle flash from his Arisaka rifle gave away his exact location. MacLeod waited for 30 seconds. He knew the sniper would move after firing. And he knew, with the instinct of a hunter, exactly where he would move to, towards the nearest dense cover, a thicket of tree ferns about 15 yards from his original hide. When the Japanese soldier poked his head through the ferns, MacLeod fired. 9th sniper eliminated. The 9th of February was different. The Japanese had ceased all sniper operations in that sector. Their commanders, realizing that some unseen force was methodically annihilating their best marksmen, had ordered a withdrawal of the surviving snipers to positions further inland. But 2 of them, it seemed, hadn't received the order in time. At 2:30 in the afternoon, MacLeod located an isolated sniper in a palm tree at 280 yards. The soldier was staring intently towards the British perimeter, completely unaware that the real danger was stalking him from his flank. 1 shot. 1 clean kill. 10th sniper eliminated. The 11th, and final, sniper was the most difficult. At 4:45, as the sun began to dip and the jungle shadows lengthened, MacLeod caught an unnatural glint of light, the telltale flash of a telescopic sight. It was 340 yards away, the longest shot of the entire operation. This Japanese sniper was a professional, well hidden and patient. Only a tiny sliver of his shoulder was visible through a gap in the leaves. It was an exceptionally difficult shot, requiring a perfect calculation of range and bullet drop. MacLeod dialed in the elevation on his scope, made a tiny adjustment for a non-existent wind, took a breath, let it out slowly until his lungs were still, and squeezed the trigger. The glint of light vanished. The leaves in the canopy shook violently. Then, silence. 11th sniper eliminated. MacLeod returned to the camp as dusk fell. In less than 4 days of operations, he had personally accounted for 11 trained Japanese snipers. He had fired 17 rounds at enemy marksmen, scoring 14 hits, an effectiveness rate of over 80%. And he had done it all with a rifle his mates had called a toy. But this was not the end of Alistair MacLeod's story. The Holland he carried in Burma fundamentally changed the way the British Army thought about sniping. After the war, MacLeod was recruited to the School of Infantry at Warminster, where he wrote a manual on marksmanship and fieldcraft that became required reading for a generation of Army snipers. In it, he championed the use of high-quality, precision-built bolt-action rifles with superior optics over any mass-produced alternative. A sniper does not need volume of fire, he wrote. He needs one perfect shot. He needs a rifle he knows like his own hand, and a scope he would trust with his life. Everything else is secondary. The army, eventually, listened. When the next generation of sniper rifles was developed, culminating in the legendary L96A1, the core principles were McLeod's: supreme accuracy, robustness, and the perfect marriage of rifle, scope, and shooter. The doctrine he had proven in the Burmese jungle had become the standard. But there is something more, something the military records fail to capture. After the war, Sergeant McLeod returned to Sutherland. He went back to being a ghillie, to stalking deer across the windswept hills. He lived a quiet life, far from the suffocating heat of the jungle and the chilling finality of war. When anyone asked him about Burma, he always said the same thing. "I wasn't a hero. I was just a hunter." The only difference in the Arakan was that the stag was shooting back. He was right. And that makes his achievement all the more extraordinary. Because the Japanese snipers of Burma were not animals. They were dedicated, highly trained soldiers who knew the jungle intimately and held every advantage of terrain. And yet, a deerstalker from the Scottish Highlands, with a rifle he had paid for himself, took them apart, one by one. 11 snipers. 4 days. 17 shots. 1 hunting rifle. Sometimes, the best weapons aren't the most advanced or the most expensive. Sometimes, the best weapon is simply the one the shooter knows better than anyone else. Alistair MacLeod knew his Holland, and that knowledge saved countless British lives in one of the most brutal campaigns of the Second World War. They laughed at his rifle when he arrived in Burma. No one was laughing when he was done. What do you think of this extraordinary story? Did you know about the role of individual marksmen like Alistair MacLeod in the Burma campaign? Leave us your comments below and subscribe to Tales of War. Every week, we bring you verified, fascinating stories that changed the course of history. Activate the notification